This question asks which choice best describes the function of the underlying question in the text as a whole. So what is the function of saying, how lifelike are they? Many computer animators prioritize this question as they strive to create ever more realistic environments and lighting. Okay, so this question, how lifelike is it, for computer games is a priority that animators use. Generally, all characters in computer animated films appear highly exaggerated environments and lighting are carefully engineered to mimic reality. But some animators, such as Pixar's Sanjay Patel, are focused on a different question. Rather than asking first whether the environments and lighting they created are convincingly lifelike, how lifelike are they, the question at the beginning, Patel and others are asking whether those elements reflect their film's unique stories. Okay. So this talking about unique stories is another approach or purpose for asking the question. But the original question, its goal is to prioritize animators' work, that they strive to create more realistic environments. That's the purpose of this question, which is the question at hand here. That's the function of the underlying question. Let's see what answer matches that. It reflects a primary goal, yes, right? They prioritize. That's a primary goal. Many computer animators, that's who we're talking about, yes, have for certain components of the animations they produce. Yes, they want ever more realistic environments. This is going to be the answer. Let's just check B, C, and D. It represents a concern of computer animators who are more interested in creating unique backgrounds. No, not a concern. And not for animators wanting to create unique backgrounds rather than realistic ones. That's not the case here, even though that's mentioned later in the passage here. C, it conveys the uncertainty among many computer animators about how to create uncertainty about creating? No, they have a goal to create more realistic environments. It's not a question of uncertainty. That's irrelevant to the point. D, it illustrates a reaction that audiences typically have. No, nothing discusses audiences' reactions here. Okay, that is not part of the passage. That's not correct. A is in fact the answer. 2, which best describes the main purpose of the text. So this is a main purpose question. Again, our answers will be verbs. It describes, illustrates, it summarizes, it presents, and then we have to figure out exactly what it does, what things it's doing there. So let's read the passage and identify the main purpose. The field of study called affective neuroscience seeks instinctive physiological causes for feelings such as pleasure or displeasure. Okay, so this means there are, instinctive, they're physiological causes for feelings. So we can explain them as physical results. Because these sensations are linked to a chemical component, for example, the release of the neurotransmitter dopamine in the brain when one receives or expects a reward. So dopamine, the chemical, reacts and the person therefore feels pleasure or displeasure. They can be said to have a partly physiological basis, right? So that's kind of the idea, that there's a physical input, like a chemical reaction that causes the feelings of pleasure or displeasure. These processes have been described in mammals, but so-and-so colleagues have recently observed that some behaviors of honeybees are also motivated by a dopamine-based signaling process. Okay, so what's the main purpose here? To tell us that there are physical or physiological, chemical-based inputs into feeling pleasure and displeasure. And not only in mammals, but we've found that in insects as well. So honeybees, to be more particular. So A, it describes an experimental method of measuring the strength of... No, it's not a method of measuring the strength. That is not what's discussed here. There is a relationship between the chemical produced and the feelings, but nothing about measuring the strength and the method of that. B, it illustrates processes by which certain insects can express how they're feeling. Okay, so just because the honeybees are foraging and they release dopamine, we do not know how the honeybees are feeling. Nobody can say, hey, honeybee, how are you feeling? That's just not possible. C, it summarizes a finding suggesting that some mechanisms in the brain, okay, this passage is summarizing a finding that, there are chemical, physiological responses that cause pleasure and displeasure. So I think that part's good. In the brains of certain insects resemble mechanism in mammalian brains. Yes, some insects, honeybees in particular, resemble mechanisms in mammalian brains. They both utilize dopamine. I think this is going to be our answer. C. Let's check D. It presents research showing that certain insects, honeybees again, and mammals behave similarly when there is a possibility of a reward for their actions. No. Okay, so they both release dopamine. That doesn't mean they behave similarly. Okay, that is just not the case. So that's not correct. C is the correct answer. Okay, we've got another main purpose question. So to describe, discuss, evaluate, or summarize findings. So let's take a look at what's going on. Studying late 19th and early 20th century artifacts from an agricultural and domestic site in Texas, archaeologists such and such found that black women employed as farm workers utilized hook and eye closures to fasten their clothes at the waist, giving them a silhouette similar to the one that was popular in contemporary fashion and typically achieved through more restrictive garments such as corsets. So the women designed their own kind of fashionable corsets, even though they were working on the farm. Okay. Flewellen, so this is kind of giving us a background of a study, right? Flewellen argues that this sartorial practice shows that these women balance hegemonic ideals of femininity with the requirements of their physically demanding occupation. So sartorial, we may not know. Hegemonic, we may not know. Not sure these are important words though, right? It's a practice that these women balance the ideals of femininity with the requirements of actually working on the farm in the 19th and 20th centuries. So, all right, which states the main purpose? To describe an unexpected discovery that altered a researcher's view of how rapidly fashions among black female workers in the 19th century, how rapidly the fashions changed. Nothing here is about how rapid the fashion changed. That's not the idea. It's that they designed these hook and eye closures to basically resemble the fashion. Okay, B, to discuss research that investigated the ways in which black female workers in late 19th, early 20th century Texas used fashion practices to resist traditional gender ideals. They weren't resisting anything, according to this. Okay. One might presume that or say that, but they're not resisting. In fact, they're definitely not resisting because they're trying to imitate other fashion at the time, like corsets. That's not right. C, to evaluate a scholarly work that offers explanations for the impact of urban fashion ideals on black female farm workers. Wait a second. They're farm workers. Urban fashion means city fashion. These do not connect. This is not the right answer, right? That is not what this is about. D, to summarize the findings of a study, it does do that. Women used this hook and eye closure that explored factors influencing a fashion practice among black female farm workers. Yes, the practice was to basically recreate a corset. And in that time frame of Texas, this is the answer. D is correct. Okay, which best describes the function of the second sentence in the overall structure of the text? So the function, the overall structure, these are typical, asking about the function of the underlined portion. What is it doing? Not merely what does it say, but what is it serving to do? That's what we want to figure out. So let's read the text. Astronomers, and by the way, function questions generally start with verbs. Is it describing a limitation? Is it presenting a finding? Is it identifying a problem? Is it explaining how something works? So astronomers are confident that the star Betelgeuse will eventually consume all the helium in its core and explode in a supernova. They are much less confident, however, about when this will happen, since that depends on internal characteristics of Betelgeuse that are largely unknown. So they know it's going to happen, they just don't know when. And they don't know what's going to cause the when. So it's a bit of a mystery. Such and such and colleagues recently investigated whether acoustic waves in the star could be used to determine interstellar states, but they concluded that this could not sufficiently reveal Betelgeuse's internal characteristics to allow its evolutionary state to be firmly affixed. In other words, they used this method of acoustic waves. It didn't work. Okay. So what's the purpose of this underlined text? Well, to show that they couldn't solve the when. They could determine the what, not the when. So A, it describes a serious limitation, it does at that, of the method used by Nance and colleagues. No, not the method. It's not the method that's the limitation. It's the result of when that's the limitation they can't solve. B, it presents the central finding reported by Nance and colleagues. No, that is not their central finding. That is what they can't solve, right? Their central finding is that the stars are definitely going to explode. C, it identifies the problem that Nance and colleagues attempted to solve. Yeah, it's a problem they tried to solve. When? They used acoustic waves, but they couldn't solve it. But they did not solve it. This is the answer. C is the correct answer. D, it explains how the work of Nance and colleagues was received by others in the field. Nothing here talks about others in the field. That's simply not in the passage. C is the correct answer. Five, which choice describes the function of the underlined portion of the text as a whole? So again, we want to know the purpose, the function of the underlined text. What is it doing? Is it elaborating on a claim, offering an example, noting a possible exception, or providing further details? Let's take a look. According to historian such and such, Mexican-American women made crucial contributions to the labor movement during World War II. At the time, food processing companies entered into contracts to supply United States Armed Forces with canned goods. Increased production quotas conferred greater bargaining power on the company's employees, many of whom were Mexican-American women. So the war came around, they had to produce the food for the troops, and the women, therefore, the Mexican-American women, gained more power as workers. So the underlined portion is, well, it's after a colon, so it's probably going to be an example. I'm going to focus on this answer in particular. Elaborates possibly too after a colon. So employees insisted on more favorable benefits. Employers who were anxious to fulfill the contracts complied. So what was the greater bargaining power? It was the ability to get favorable benefits and favorable benefits. Okay. So A, it elaborates on a claim about labor relations in a particular industry made earlier in text. Yeah, the claims earlier were that they got greater bargaining power. And it's elaborating on that by saying they got favorable benefits that they insisted on. And this is in a particular industry, basically in the food processing business. This looks pretty good. I'm going to point that out, and let's move on, check B, C, and D. It offers an example of a trend in the World War II era economy discussed earlier. No, this is not a general trend. It's specifically talking about Mexican-American women in the food processing business. That does not make a full trend. B is not correct. C, it notes a possible exception to the historical narrative of labor activism sketched earlier. No, it's not an exception. That's not why we use a colon, to show an exception. D, it provides further details about the identities. About the identities of the workers discussed? No, there's no mention of particular identities of workers. It's just Mexican-American women, right? No further details provided about the identity. So that's not right. A was the correct answer. It elaborates on a claim that in the food processing industry, Mexican-American women, gained greater bargaining power by getting favorable benefits.